Roxanne, Renee,
Nice to meet you.
Josh, nice to meet you too.
Yeah.
And Sarah, of course.
Of course.
So yeah, just kind of
Yeah.
give us the lowdown.
This is both water and sewer. I'm not sure.
Oh, that was water and sewer.
Yeah, so
Oh.
there's two. Yeah. And then I can start either one if you have a preference. If not, I guess I have water in front of me, so we can do that.
Okay, yes, I see water.
Yeah, so water I think is all new to you. Sewer, we just made a minor update from what I think Scott Miller came and kind of presented
Yes,
earlier
right,
this year.
okay,
Yeah, so we just update. Well, I'll save sewer for sewer. We'll start with water.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
So this is set up kind of the same way that that report was. If you want to open up to, I guess, page 2, and I'll just go through this at a pretty high level, but you know, if you want me to dig in anything, you know, let me know. Feel free to ask questions. But this is just kind of a snapshot of your cash balances at the end of 2024, same last year, compared to what you should have, kind of at a minimum, and then kind of what the excess is of that. We break it down by fund. Most pertinent is just the total. So $726,451 across all your water funds at the end of 2024. You should have had about $400,000 at a minimum. So you have an excess of that about $325,000. So a decently healthy cash balance. You know, you have about $800,000 annually in O&M expenses that we'd expect on a moving forward basis. That's after the increase in Hoosier Hills purchase water rates as well. So you know, that represents a little less than half a year of your kind of operating expenses, which is I'd say a sufficient cash balance. Not necessarily one that we want to spend down a ton, but you know, sufficient
Well,
to
we've got
you're in fine cash
emergencies and things.
Yep, of course, yep. So turning the page 3, this is just a snapshot of your first column is your 2024 operation and maintenance, a day-to-day operating costs, salaries, materials, purchase power, things like that. So in 2024, about $640,000 was our year-end full 12-month operation and maintenance disbursements. We make some adjustments to that. The most significant of that is the purchase water cost increase from Hoosier Hills. That's about 4 lines down. That's about a $76,000 increase is what we expect in those day-to-day operating expenses for a year. Overall, we adjust about $100,000 to get to an estimated amount. We then inflate that a little bit to get you to what we want to build into the rates, which is really kind of a year or so out. What are your operating costs going to be? Assuming that if you do go forward with an increase, you're probably not going to revisit that necessarily the following year.
Okay.
So that gets you to what we want to build in, estimated annual cash operating disbursements, roughly $790,000.
And that includes, how much did you just say as far as like a percentage or what kind of?
Yeah, so that'll be kind of further on because we pull kind of all the costs together to be able to get there. But roughly versus 2024, it's about a $150,000 increase in operating costs. So that's going to represent roughly a 20% increase, a little bit less than 20% increase to those costs. And like I said, the majority of that increase is driven by that purchase water adjustment, but then also just general inflationary increases.
All right.
Pages 4 or 5, I'll kind of skip those, but those are just the detail of the adjustments that we made on page 3. If you want to kind of get into the weeds, certainly you can look through that.
Okay.
But just to give you kind of a normal year of operating expenses.
Right.
Page 6, this is your outstanding 2021 bonds. So just wanted to know, you're paying about $81,000 a year roughly in bond payments for those bonds. Those will go out till January of 2032, which very surprisingly we're getting close to. So not too much longer, but $81,000 a year right now on those 2021 bond payments. Page 7, so this is your capital improvement plan. A couple things I wanted to discuss on this. So, we have here obviously the major projects that we have upcoming, the rehab painting, and the 500,000 gallon storage tank, non-construction costs for the 2 tank projects, the demolition and that rehab painting, significant meter pits, cellular replacement. So all in 2026, we have roughly $1.3 million in capital improvements that were identified. Of that, I understand the engineering team's kind of working on Oak So looking to potentially apply for an OPRA grant, which would be
Right.
$750,000 is what you'd be potentially eligible for. So, you know, if we take that out, we've got roughly $550,000 that we would need to come up with in cash funding to fund everything. So we have assumed about $400,000 in Tyson funding. We don't necessarily need to do that. We can go kind of another route, use some water cash, or do bond anticipation notes. So there's various things we could look at to be able to get you to that kind of cash component. But we plugged in just as kind of an illustrative placeholder that $400,000 number. So that I think is a discussion point for us, is what's going to be available from Tyson potentially to be able to fund a portion of the project.
Okay, so here's the scoop on Tyson.
Yep.
The town, every year, the town applies for money.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, it's, our request is somewhere around, depending on, you know, what we know they have available.
Mm-hmm.
We will typically apply for anywhere from $350,000 to $450,000 a year.
Okay. Yep.
But that's for several projects.
Right.
It's not just for one thing.
Yep.
And inherent in that is typically a request for about $50,000 for our roads and streets to
Yep.
match out with community crossings. We typically ask for $50,000. We have for the last several years for emergency sewer repairs because we just have to.
Right.
And so we can ask for things, but we are not guaranteed any of that money in
Yep.
any year.
Yep.
And the second part of that is that they cannot, I think in the past, many years, several years ago before I came on board, so at least, probably 15, 20 years ago, there was a point, I think, where they did agree they were going to put it in writing that they were going to pay a water bond. They are not legally allowed to do that.
Okay.
So we'll never get a guarantee from them.
Yep.
Although, unless, you know, the stock market completely crashes and they lose it all,
Yep.
you know, we would be in trouble. But the fund right now, Bob looked last night, I think it's at about 24 million. So that's good for us as far as disbursements in the next couple of years. If it holds at that or grows a little bit more, that typically means we can ask for a little more money.
Yeah.
And we like to go, when we go to the Tyson Fund, typically we're asking for equipment payments, which 1 or 2 of those a year. And we ask for part of this water bond that we have. We ask for money, we don't ask for the whole payment, but we ask for like half of that.
Yep.
And then we like to, if we're asking for other things, we're typically trying to ask for money that is matching money.
Yes.
So that we can multiply that money out.
Yep.
And they like that we're doing that.
Yes, of course. Yep.
So that's kind of where the Tyson Fund stands. No guarantees at all.
Yep.
However, we can typically, probably, I'm thinking, we can look at 50, maybe even 75,000
Yep.
in some matching money or some money to help pay for these bonds every year.
Yep.
I'm not gonna commit to anything more than that.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, we have to look, and every year we put our list together and then we have to prioritize, and there are always things that get pushed off for a year or 2, or sometimes pushed off forever even.
Right.
But that's where, you know,
That's
the
helpful.
Tyson Fund though it's been so good to us, and we have
Absolutely.
done so many good things in the past 10 years with that money.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll continue to do that, but the number one stipulation, or the number one, I guess that's what it would be, I don't know what it would be called, in the fund is that it is supposed to go to relieve the taxpayer's burden.
Right.
Okay, and
Yep.
so anything that the town would be, any improvements we would be making, that relieves the taxpayer's burden
Yep.
if they're funding it. So we don't typically have any kind of an issue, the board doesn't have any kind of issue with our applications,
Yep.
because we try to keep that in the back of our mind when we're doing it.
Yeah.
Even for what we're gonna call the fluffy little extra thing.
Sure.
You know,
Yep.
sometimes we have, you know, we've got something kind of on the plate right now, which is a facade improvement thing that I think we're gonna ask for next year, and that's,
Yep.
might be a little fluffy, but I think they'll understand the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, why you
you
want to
know.
do that? Yeah,
Right.
that makes sense to me. And I think
Okay.
so. I think we've got a couple of avenues that we can look at then. So, you know, if we know that we need, let's just say, $550,000 roughly for matching funds and completion of projects for, this essentially this big project that
Right.
we have. So we could look at, we looked at page 2 right at the beginning that you had about $325,000 in funds above what your minimum would be. So that gives us kind of a delta. What we're missing, we'll say $225,000 roughly. So if we wanted to avoid doing anything with a bond in, for this current project that we have that we're looking at, we would essentially need to get from Tyson a minimum of that, $225,000. So that would be able to fund upfront, a portion of the match for that Okra grant, and then your cash funding that you have, your excess funds, would be able to fund the rest, essentially. So that's kind of, I'll say that's option, we'll call that option 1.
225.
It's 225 minimum. If more, then you use less of your cash on hand. If that's too much, which it sounds like it probably is, we probably would need to look at, this probably 2 separate options, but one would be potentially bond anticipation notes.
Right.
So what that would be is you can issue those for a term up to 5 years. Essentially, it's a loan that you would receive from a bank, potentially a local bank, potentially, kind of a Indianapolis type bank, that would fund your projects now, and the payback source for that would be a promise to issue long-term bonds in the future. So that gives us kind of like a 5-year window to be able to go out and issue bonds. The benefit of doing bond anticipation notes over bonds, a couple things. One, it's a little bit quicker and easier process, but you do have to do bonds eventually, so that's not necessarily a huge pro. It's just a pro for the short term if you need funding quickly. The second thing that would be a pro, and I think in this case really is the pro, would be that it gives you some time to go out and issue that longer term bond, so that if you have other projects that may be coming down the pike, you have some time to decide if you want to move forward with those at the same time and maybe issue a larger bond for both. So going into your capital plan here, you can see in 2030 we have a fairly significant potential project, I think, that was identified by your superintendent, the looping of the 12-inch water main for $1,067,500. So that's on page 7, column, the 2030 column. There's that significant looping project.
Is that the looping at the, that's at the firehouse, right? There.
Yeah.
That's one thing it is.
Yeah, out there, okay.
And that is, we show, and we'll get to it later, we showed a couple scenarios for that. One would be a way that you could do it with cash funding, one would be bond funding. I think what ultimately makes sense, it's gonna be bond funding, because the rate impact's a lot lower in that kind of bond funded scenario, but I wanted to, prove that out. If we're gonna do potentially bonds for this or bond anticipation notes, that makes kind of bonds make all the more sense for that too, because we could potentially do it at the same time, and save a little bit on issuance costs potentially. There's some considerations there in that, we have potentially could do SRF funding, could potentially do open market funding, so we've got some different options that we could look at. But I think ultimately, if that project is going to go, I think bond anticipation notes probably would be what make more sense for you, so that you could try to kind of go out once and issue bonds. Our third option would be we just do bonds now. It's a small bond. We go out and issue it. We go out and potentially issue again in 2030 or whenever we need to do that using a 12-inch water main. So that's an option too. Nothing wrong with that option. You're just going to incur a little bit more in issuance costs overall. But either bond anticipation notes or bonds for this 2026 project are completely fine options.
Yeah. Something I want to point out that we just found out, more than 2 weeks ago, maybe, or a week and a half ago. We think that the rehab of that storage tank, we have a maintenance agreement with that company, and we think we're going to be able to do that at a very minimal cost now.
Okay.
So instead of the 500, I'm thinking we're looking at maybe, I'd say 50 to 100 max, probably.
Okay.
So, that was a pleasant little surprise.
Yeah.
That was an agreement that it was made 30 years ago now?
Yep.
2019, no, when was that? I don't know, I think 1990, no, 97, 90 something. Anyway, it's about 30 years ago, so we're in good shape on that, a good 25.
Good, yeah.
So we think that's gonna be helpful to us, so that might change the look of
Yeah, I
this
agree.
project, but we've done the bond anticipation notes in the past, and that gives us a little time to
Yes.
pay down a little bit with
Yes.
Tyson money.
Yep,
You know, and that's what we've done, is apply that 50,000 each year, and then by the time we have to actually get the bond,
a little bit
then-
less, yeah.
you're looking a little bit less, and
Yeah.
that's just a little bit, you know.
Yeah, I think
So
that makes
that's
sense for
probably,
you
I think
potentially.
that's probably what we would do there too.
Okay, yeah,
That'd be my guess.
I'll note that so we can kind of go
Okay.
back and think through what that looks like exactly. But so you know what that comes down to ultimately, you can see at the kind of the bottom right of our schedule. We had shown that first line is an average annual amount of capital if you're cash funding a larger project. We can kind of ignore that one and go to the very bottom right, which is your average cash funded capital if we exclude that $1,067,000 from cash funding. So if we're saying we're gonna bond fund that, so
Okay.
you'd essentially have, and we can massage the numbers a little bit, because if we're gonna do bands, we might put a little bit more into the bands in 2026 than what we are right now, because we
Okay.
were just assuming Tyson funding. So that might go down a little bit, but we'll say roughly, $50,000 to $70,000 a year
Yeah.
is what we're
Okay.
gonna build into the rates for
Okay.
capital improvements on an annual basis.
Hang on, I'm looking at there.
Page 8 is where we bring together, those different numbers for kind of the rate calculation. So I'll just run you through to the left column and the right column. We'll ignore the middle column, which is if you cash funded that larger project. So the first column is your current operations. So this is basically saying, based on your newer operation and maintenance costs, those updated day-to-day costs out a couple years, your outstanding bonds that you have now, and then just capital replacement and improvements that are minimal. Essentially, those are just your $20,000 a year that you have for meter pits and setters, and then $25,000 for lead service line is how it gets to 45 total. So that's just we'll say minimal capital, existing bond requirements, and then operation maintenance over the next couple years. What do your current operations look like? So for this, we have one more highlighted line for Tyson. We had assumed about $100,000 annually in Tyson contribution. If that goes down or up, we can kind of adjust for that. I will say I put in a footnote at the bottom that for every $100,000 in Tyson contribution, that brings the rate increase that you would need down about 13% roughly. So if we say, Tyson funding's 50,000 instead of 100,000, we would add about 6.5% to the rate increase that we need. So for every $100,000 they contribute, it's 13%.
And we're talking on a yearly basis.
On a yearly basis, on an ongoing basis, right?
Okay, yeah, and
so
it probably would be close, it
Yeah.
would probably be the 50, not.
Sure. So yeah,
Okay.
we'll update that to 50, and then we'll recirculate this. But
Okay.
so I'll get you kind of the numbers with the 50 roughly.
Okay.
So based on that, you would have net annual revenue requirements. So that's kind of the top section is your costs that you have to fund. So you've got the $800,000 roughly in day-to-day costs, 81,000 bonds, 45,000 in capital. We back out interest income and then Tyson funding because that's not going to change with the rate increase. That gets you net revenue requirements, so that's what you would need to fund through your rates, essentially.
Okay.
We had 815,000, we'll say 865,000 if your Tyson is 50,000. So that's what you would need to fund through your rates and charges.
Okay.
Currently, you're bringing in from your meter sales 728,000 roughly, and then public fire protection, which we'll circle back and talk about that a little bit, but should be bringing in about $46,000 a year. That takes you to 774,000, we'll say, is what we're bringing in currently based on our current rates. So we've got a shortfall there of about 91,000 by the time we added that 50,000 extra from Tyson. What that would equate to, instead of the 5% you see there, it'll be roughly 12%, we'll say, in a rate increase that would be needed for these current operations. So that would take you from your current, we say an average residential bill is about 4,000 gallons. You're at $47.76 right now. 12% on that is about a $6 increase, roughly. So that would take you from $47.76 to roughly $53.76 on a monthly bill. So that's current operations, not bond funding your project. So if we look at cash and bond funded projects, you know, that brings the numbers up a little bit. So our net revenue requirements, we were at 943,000. That'd be about 993 if we add the Tyson in, or take the Tyson to 50,000 rather. I will say there's a little bit of massaging we can maybe do here. You've got those outstanding bonds that are done in 2031. And if we go the bond anticipation note route, we would have kind of a 5-year window, which would take us out to about 2031 to issue those longer term bonds. So we had built into the rates both the outstanding bonds and payments on new bonds for that looping project. You know, we could probably work it so that your old bonds fall off when your new bond payments start, which we can kind of bring down the rate impact a little bit doing it that way. So we'll massage that. We're also going to have a little bit of an increase to the bond size because we would need to do those bands for the other component of projects that you have, the 2026 projects. So, you know, I think your number's going to come down a little bit from this. Well, ultimately with the Tyson funding, the 50,000 less, it's probably going to come back close to what we show here. So I'll just kind of run you through what we have here, and then when we revise this for those updated assumptions, I'll get you what kind of the final numbers come out to. But roughly, you know, we'll say $940,000, $950,000 a year in revenue requirements is what I'd expect. Again, you're bringing in $774,000 a year. That gives you a shortfall. It's about $170,000 a year. That's about a 22% increase in your rates. That takes your monthly bill from the $47.76 to $58.20. But keep in mind too, as we say, you know, 22% increase in rates, that would be when we're starting to pay back those bonds. So we would have, let's say, roughly 5 years to kind of get to that point.
Okay, can I stop you there then?
Yep.
Just for a second? So, we wouldn't start paying those back until that point, so we could do incremental increases.
Yes,
Okay.
which is what I would suggest. So
Yeah, right.
that's
And we wanted to be able to do that.
Yep, so essentially what I think I'll end up showing you is, in the next version of this, is three scenarios. One is current, one is once we issue the bond anticipation notes, because once we issue those, you'll have interest payments that you'll start making.
You're right.
So we'll build in that to show you what, you know, what increase that would be to the rate that we're showing in the current operations.
Okay.
And then we'll show once the bonds are issued.
Okay.
So that'll kind of help map out, you know, what do we need now, which would be kind of our current operations, maybe around that 10 to 12% increase. And then what do we need to get to, and where are we at in the middle, so that we can kind of map out how we phase those increases in. What I'd probably suggest is we do, and it depends how the numbers are going to come out, but we probably want to do something like a 2-phase or maybe a 3-phase that come in and incorporate your current, and then with the band interest. And then we wait to do kind of one final change when we get out to 2030, 2031, whenever we kind of bid the final projects, we have final numbers, we know what the bond size is going to be, so that we can tell you exactly what you need, because we wouldn't want to over or undershoot the rates if you went ahead and just did them all right now. So we can probably take our time to get to, and use a little bit of that cash reserve that we've built up to get to where you need to be before the bonds are issued, and then we can kind of do in 2030, 2031, one final rate increase. If needed, you know, maybe the bids come back good, maybe we don't even need to do anything, but to get you exactly what you need in that bond.
That far out.
Yeah, and we're not talking huge numbers on the increase here. So I think being able to kind of spread it out like that will help you do more inflationary type increases in nature, like 4 or 5% a year or something like that.
Yeah.
To be able to,
Yeah, that
massage that.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
It's a lot of information. One more thing I want to point out, just on page 10, just to give you kind of an eye at where your rates are at.
Yeah,
Various,
let's take a peek at
you know,
these.
things. And the cash funded, you can ignore that far right one that you'd be, but you're the green, kind of those 3 green near the middle.
Yeah.
So we'd be, you know, all in near the end, near that kind of $53-ish a month number. Your state average, this was from end of 2024 data, was $38.25, so probably close to $40 by now. in state average, and especially by the time you actually start doing these increases, probably around $40. We've got some nearby communities just to show you kind of where people are at. So you fall somewhere in the middle, a little bit leaning towards the higher side. A lot of stuff's out of your control, obviously, on where your rates are. Yeah, but you're certainly not out of out of whack with everybody. You're not way off to the right of the scale. So I didn't point that out.
Okay, and then that we're sales cash funded, but we would not do that.
Yes, correct. So just to reiterate, I'll update, we'll assume some band funding for the projects for in 2026, bonds in 2031, well, we'll say 2030. And then we will do, we'll kind of kick off that prior bond payment before we start the new bond payments to try to mitigate the rate increase a little bit as well. So we'll make those updates, and we'll bring down the Tyson funding to $50,000 a year, and then we'll see what that looks like and circulate that.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think it's going to come back fairly close to what you're seeing here. Kind of, I think your current operations will come up just a tick. Your ending rate will be pretty close to what we show there. And because you have some cash balance, we can kind of map out how we want to phase in those rates. It takes some time to do that.
Okay, so just to make sure that I got this correct, with our current operations, we'd be looking at a 6% increase just to get us where we are right now.
Yeah.
We move forward with those couple of projects, which is take down the old tower, build, refurbish the new tower, which maybe will save some more money there, but and then do that water loop. We're looking at a 22% increase, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, to 58 something.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
And I think.
So that's probably where we're looking, right?
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to make sure I had that correct.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything else there?
That's all I wanted to go through. So happy to answer any questions if you have them. But
Any questions? Killer. It's not great, but it's the next one that's going to be the killer.
yeah, this is the less fun one.
Yeah,
it's not a lot different from what we had previously looked at. So I'm not going to go through everything because you guys have already seen most of it. But maybe if you want to start on page 6, this is where things have changed a little bit. So before we had broken things out into current operations, short-term projects, long-term projects. Now I think the scope of the project that you're doing now is a lot more defined, and this will be really
right. I think it is too.
the only project we need to consider for this set of increases.
Okay.
So that takes us to, as we got updated numbers from Jill and Lori at the middle of December-ish. So that takes us to all in by the time we look at the construction costs, the non-construction costs that they had identified, plus cost of issuance, about $8.2 million roughly for the bonds for the project as a whole. So what does that kind of mean for you? If you go to the next page, you can see the rates themselves. So similarly, we have the current operations with the project. They're vastly different. The current operations just has your day-to-day operating expenses of about $380,000 a year. Capital replacements and improvements, which is based on historical numbers of about, we'll say roughly $80,000 a year. So $460,000 total. $455,000 is kind of our net number. If we think that Tyson would fund, $50,000 a year, so you mentioned for kind of breaks, things like that might come up through the future, which we hope obviously that you do project that goes down a little bit. But we could bring this down a little bit further, but we haven't assumed any Tyson funding in this, so this is kind of before any Tyson funding.
Let's just move it here then.
Yep, so $456,000 is what you would need to fund. In current operations, you're currently bringing in about $391,000. $65,000 is the shortfall there, about 17% roughly. So your current 4,000 gallon bill on sewer is very reasonable, $32.44. So with this, roughly 17% increase, that's about a $5.40 increase to that monthly bill. That'd take you about $38 roughly a month for a 4,000 gallon bill. So that's with no project. Obviously we have a project, so with project the numbers are vastly different. We have The change here is the building in the debt service payments on the proposed bonds. So we've got $471,000 annually in debt service payments. That's based on a 35-year amortization term with the Indiana State Revolving Fund. So there's some things there we can look at. I think until we get kind of a funding package from SRF to understand what they're willing to offer, this is probably what our assumption should be. This would be what would mitigate rates the most. So we could do a 20-year, that would bring rates up. We pay less in interest over time, but our bond payment would be, significantly higher if we paid back in 20 years versus 35. So we're assuming right now that we fund this through a 35-year non-subsidized interest rate through SRF, so it'd be through their pool program, which essentially means that they would go out and issue bonds on the open market with the state's AAA credit rating. They'd pass along that interest rate to the town, and we would get what they get on their bonds. They also have, if we apply for SRF funding, we score high enough on their project priority list, which is very competitive. There's 100 plus projects. You're going to get 10, 15 projects that get subsidized funding, but we could potentially get traditional funding, which would allow us to come down to a much lower interest rate. We'd probably save about 2% a year on interest. So we're assuming about 4.5% now. We'd be closer to 2.5% likely if we did get traditional funding with SRF. That would also open up the possibility for a little bit of grant funding potentially from them. We don't know one way or another. I wouldn't.
That's a crapshoot.
Yeah, and I wouldn't expect it at the number that we're looking at, because even though our number looks high, they have typically a higher target number for sewer rate. So they'll typically start buying down sewer rate if you're up near maybe $95 a month. We're not there, which is fortunate. As much as we'd like grant money, fortunate we're not there. So $471,000 a year is what we need in bonds. We also have to fund a debt service reserve, so that would be equal to essentially 1 year of your debt payments. We have to fund that over a 5-year period. So we build that into the revenues that we bring in, so we can generate $94,000 a year to be able to set aside to fund that reserve. And then finally, we have our replacements and improvements. We have this at about $48,000 here. We're just building that into the amount that we would essentially need to build into the rates to be able to go out and get the bonds issued.
Okay.
That's for debt service coverage, so to be able to show that you have rates high enough to essentially be able to pay back your bonds. So all in, that takes you to total revenue requirements just under $1 million, $994,200. We back out those few revenues that we have that aren't really subject to the rate increase. That gets you to your net requirements, what you would need to fund through your rates of $990,000. We bring in just, say again, about $390,600, so that's a shortfall of just under $600,000. Obviously a very high percentage, 153% increase. A lot of that is because your current rates are low. So if you're doing, that change calculation, your denominator of the calculation is really low. That's going to bring the percentage up. So it's probably better to look at it even in dollars and cents versus percentage, which still doesn't look great as a change in monthly bill. So we're at $32.44 now. It'd be about a $50 increase to that monthly bill to take you to about $82 a month. So I don't know what sounds better to you, the $50 to 82 or 153%, but essentially that's what we'd be looking at is all in, going up about 50 a month for a 4,000 gallon bill to that 82.24 number, all in with the project.
Is that another one though that we could do incrementally?
I think we could do it incrementally, yes. So with SRF, we'll need to show that we have at least 125% debt service coverage for every year of bond payments that we show on what they require, kind of a projection report that looks out. So we have to look out at least 1 year past construction completion on the bond. So by the time we get past construction completion and we have full bond payments coming on, we would need to be at this rate. But we would have the construction period kind of to get there.
That's what we were kind of talking about, that if we could spread that increase over the next 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it would be, then
I think
it's
that
a
makes
little more
sense.
palatable.
So what we can probably get before the next time we talk about rates is from Lori and Jill exactly what that construction period would look like, kind of get a rough timetable of like, okay, if you're bidding here, we're starting here, we're ending here. We can kind of map out if we can do it in 3 phases or 4 phases. But what what I would probably suggest is we do move forward sooner than later with some sort of an increase,
Yes,
like
we
start the
agree.
first phase so
Right.
that we can kind of start stepping in and get as many of those phases in as we can before the final phase.
Right.
You know, I think we will know that we're not gonna be a lot lower than this $82 a month number. So, you know, if you wanted to adopt something now that was like, you know, let's say we talk with Lori, we find out we'll have time to do, and Jill, we find out we have time to do 4 phases. You know, you could in this whenever you do this first rate increase, you could adopt like 3 of those phases now and get, you know, 2/3, 3/4 of the way to that $82 number. So we start phasing in with this first adoption, and then once we bid the project with SRF, we could then add on a final phase, or we could, this is probably, the second option is what we would most commonly do. We just go ahead and do the first phase now.
Right.
You know, maybe it's 1/4 of the overall increase, maybe it's 20%, whatever you want to do, right?
Yeah.
And then once we have final bid numbers, we adopt the last 3 phases, or 2 phases, or however many, so that we know exactly where we need to get.
Yeah,
Yep.
we've kind of had that conversation, you know, whether we do like an increase really early on. When I say that, I mean maybe by March.
Yeah.
You know, early
Yep.
on.
Yep.
And then we do another one like 6 or 8 months later.
Yep.
And then we do another one in whatever it's gonna be, 2027, thank you.
Yep.
You know, so that once we get to this end phase, we
Yep.
have that final increase, but then we can say, this is it, we're done.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that they're not slammed right now with everything, or they're not slammed at the end with everything, that,
Yep.
you know, I mean, we know we're gonna get a ton of backlash, but I think if we can talk to people and help them understand that these are projects that, you know, I'm not trying to, you know, say that somebody didn't do their job or anything, but they're just things that happen over, and we have had projects going these last 10, 15 years.
Yep.
But they've not been a major project, and right now we need some major work done.
Yeah.
Our sewer lines here on the north side of town were put in the 1940s. It's
Right.
90 years ago,
Right.
folks.
Yep.
So, or almost 90, 85 years ago, and we gotta get them fixed.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and this happens all the time especially
Okay.
on the sewer side, where, you know, you just kind of do what you need to. But at some point,
it's so expensive.
yeah, you've got to do a big project at some point to catch up, and then
Yeah.
you get these bigger hits.
Yeah,
Like I said,
okay.
happens a lot on the sewer side. It's especially now, it's happening a lot because there's, you know, even later than what you guys did, but back in the 70s, 80s, you know, there's a lot of EPA money that were, you know,
Okay.
that
Yes.
came through, that did a lot of sewer projects. Now a lot of the useful lives of that equipment is kind of falling off.
Yeah.
So that's what makes, I think, part of what makes like SRF so competitive right now is you've got so many people in this same
In the same
situation,
boat.
and they want to see if they can get grant funding, so they need to apply to SRF, which makes it harder for us to get, you know, so it's just kind of a vicious cycle.
So
where-
we're not the only ones dealing with this.
No,
I
and
didn't
then you
hear
get
that.
elevated construction costs because everybody's on jobs already, so
Yeah,
you get
right.
bidders, so and, you know, equipment's more scarce, so yeah, it certainly is, you know,
Okay.
not something that's just you, and unfortunately, it's a lot of people in a lot of communities in Indiana, which further hurts the cause.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, we'll update the water. I'll talk with Lori and Jill on just the timing of construction for sewer, potential bid construction, just so we can maybe look at
Okay.
what a mapped out set of increases looks like.
Okay.
And then I can come to a meeting either to kind of present this in public before we introduce rates, or I can come when we introduce rates, or so whatever we want to do. Obviously, it's up to you guys.
Yeah, let's
yeah.
wait and see what happens with, you know, Lori and Jill,
Yep.
and we get a little bit better idea of the construction timeline, I think.
Yep.
And then, yeah, we're gonna want you to come back and.
Yeah.
And, we will advertise a public meeting so people can come and ask questions,
Yep.
which you would be able to answer a whole lot better than we would.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
So, okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And then, of course, I gotta turn to the last page here.
Yeah. Which,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is the part.
This part that's less fun. It's good. You can certainly point out that right now and over the years they've been paying less, which has helped.
Yeah, where we were.
Yeah, they're not going to remember that quickly when we get to the $82 number, because that's not the nature of how it works in our business.
Right.
But you would be obviously on kind of the north end of those rates. Again, the statewide is from 2024, so that $56, maybe it's like 58 now. For a couple of years down the line, by the time we get to 82, maybe you're talking about $62, $65 for the state average. So you're not going to be way out of line with what that state average is, and you'll have kind of caught up your infrastructure and your projects. So wouldn't be surprised at all to see the state average kind of start to catch you over a number of years, knowing that we would be getting in a significant amount of project here, but you would be obviously on the high end of the rate scale here from the nearby and similarly sized communities that we're looking at here. Yeah.
But, let me look at something real quick. Put that in here. Yeah. So once we get 68. Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't like that.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed. Maybe we can get lucky with the SRF
maybe.
application, or maybe if interest rates go down a little bit, if we can get down whenever we issue the debt, maybe we can get a little bit better than this.
But that takes in, this takes in all of those sewer projects on that list. Everything
Yes.
from the water treatment plant to the new
Yeah.
line clear from here all the way out.
Yeah, everything that Lori and Jill had in that December that they presented as that larger $8 million-ish number with the non-construction cost, but we have in that the wastewater treatment plant expansion and rehab, which I know
That
had a
has
couple
to be
components
done.
to it. Yeah, so that's the $4 million. That's the big one, and then you've got your manhole rehab, sanitary sewer rehab for about $1 million, the sawmill lift station, force main lift station upgrade. Yep, and then the lift station improvements at Green Creek Rehab and Tepe?
TB.
TB. Ah, dang.
TB. Tom TB Chevrolet. That's
Yep.
out there where that used to be.
Yep.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, and then logistically too, I mean, we can talk about it. I haven't talked with Lori and Jill much about timing of how much they still need to do a design. We might, if we need to do a bond anticipation note to be able to fund some of those costs, we certainly can.
Okay.
If not, if they're already a ways down the road and don't need it, they can wait until we close on long-term loan. That's fine as well, but if we need to, we can certainly talk about that. So, yeah, so it sounds like so I'll make these updates, and then it sounds like we're gonna be looking at bond anticipation notes on water, potentially bond anticipation notes on sewer, but at least bonds on sewer.
we'll have to do that for
Yep.
sure.
So I can work up, not that it's a rush, but just so that they're available for whenever you're ready to kind of move forward, I can work up like a contract for the bond anticipation notes and sewer bonds and all that. There's also and Lori and Jill might have talked to you some about this already, but in the SRF application, there's a requirement for asset management plan.
Right.
Yep, and they've probably been working on it.
They have been.
So there's three components to what SRF requires. There's a technical component, a managerial component, and a financial component.
Right.
Technical managerial, that would be your engineer. So that's your, asset inventory, what do you need, what's the project, all that stuff over the next, full asset inventory, and then kind of identify. For us, for the financial component, we extrapolate what do you need over the next 20 years based on this asset management plan. And these are just SRF requirements, so they require that you look at the next 20 years and then you show kind of a cash flow with potential rate increases over that 20-year period.
Okay.
How do you fund those assets over 20 years?
Okay.
And then along with that, what does that make your capital needs on an annual basis in a shorter term? So some of what we did in the rates, some kind of extrapolated, taking some of the engineering information and kind of broadening what we're looking at. So there's a financial component to that too. We built in costs for a contract for us for the financial portion, and then their costs too, or what typical costs are for an engineer in the numbers that you see. So when you look at the 8.2 million, that's got that in it. That would be bond funded as well. So I'll include that in the contract that we work up for bonds, so that you have that too. That would need to be done by April 1st for the SRF application window. That's not a problem. For us, we can take a lot of what we did already, build it out, and then whenever we get that stuff from Lori and Jill that we need for the 20 years, we can kind of plug that in and finalize it before that April 1st window.
That sounds good.
Yeah. guys are gonna be busy.
Yeah,
That's
we're
for
sure
sure.
busy, we know, but, you know, I just felt like we gotta get some numbers.
Yeah.
We know, and when people start asking questions, you know, we wanna be honest
Yep,
with them, you know,
absolutely.
and we don't like it, but, you know, I've had this conversation with both these guys about, you know, we could do a little bit here and a little bit there,
Yeah.
but that little bit over 20 years is gonna cost you two and a half, or 3 times what it's gonna cost. We just do it now, get it done. You
Yeah.
know, now, the problem is, you know, you look 30, 40 more years down the road, you're gonna have to do the very same thing, but I'll be dead in the ground.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about it at that point, right?
But, you know, I guess I was glad to hear you say that, you know, oh, and I knew we weren't the only ones facing this.
Right, right.
But what you were saying about the money that was available back in the, now that's starting to make sense to me now.
Yep,
That work was done then, and it's just been piecemealing since.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's hard, you know, $1 million with an Oak grant, just $1 million investment doesn't go very far at all. We found that out back in 17, I think it was, we did the north side up here, lined a bunch of things, or several things,
Yeah.
not a bunch, I mean, you don't get a whole lot for your $1 million.
yeah, just got what you could, yep, yep.
But, okay, well, Ross, I appreciate your time.
Of course,
You guys
yeah.
got questions, anything else you need to know or think about? And, so, yeah, stay in touch with,
Yes.
with Police Van Rank, with Jill and Lori, and
Yep.
then, we'll stay in touch with them too. I know they're working on things pretty hard right now to get some things together for us, so
Yep.
that we can, but I do think, I think one of our biggest deals is that we do want to do incremental increases.
Yes,
And we have to get that figured out so
Yep.
that we don't hit them all at once, especially people in low incomes and seniors and people like that with fixed incomes, that we've got to make sure that they can anticipate what's coming down the pike.
yeah, absolutely,
So-
absolutely. Maybe what I can do is when we update the water numbers and I talk with Lori and Jill, I can outline an email and I can include you, I have your email,
Perfect.
Roxanne, but just kind of what I would suggest based on those timeframes, and then we
Yes.
can maybe use that as like a framework, and then if you want to adjust, obviously we can,
Okay,
but that just
right.
gives you,
But that would
this
be great.
would work, yeah,
That would be great.
Yeah.
That would be very helpful.
Okay.
So that we
yeah,
get, I think we feel like we need to get the word out.
yeah,
We've talked about it at every council meeting for the last 3 months, trying to plant that seed that, you know, we've got some major work that has to be done, it's gonna cost money.
yep,
And, as residents, you've got to pay for it.
Right.
The ones that need the service, and
you need sewer services,
it
yep,
is what it is, so,
absolutely,
okay.
okay.
Sounds great.
Sounds like we have a good plan, so
All right.
I'll
Thank
take
you.
it.
All
Of
right.
course, yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming down early.
Well, no problem. I love. Well, I'm a morning person.
Are you?
So
Good.
yeah,
Okay.
I'm up by 5 every morning anyway.
Good
So
for you.
yeah, so this is perfect. I was
I
hoping.
used to not be a morning person.
I didn't either until I got kids, and that's the
Oh,
only
yeah,
time in
that's
my life. So I try to take advantage.